Hey everyone, welcome back. You know, we love to really sink our teeth into those topics that make you pause and think. Well, get ready because today we're diving into duality, a concept that feels surprisingly relevant to our lives. And to guide us through this, we're going deep into The End of Duality by Pedro Elias. It's a piece he published on his website, and let me tell you, it really got me thinking about how our perception shapes our reality.
It's a fascinating read for sure. What struck me right away was how Elias uses the simple image of a chessboard to explain this complex idea of duality.
Right. It's such a universal symbol. But for those of us who haven't spent our weekends in intense chess matches, how does he even connect the chessboard to duality?
Well, he starts by pointing out these opposing forces we see everywhere. Light and dark, life and death. He even mentions those right and left socks that always get lost in the dryer. And he argues that we get so caught up in this game, in picking the winning side, that we completely forget that we're the players.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. It's like we're so focused on the black and white pieces on the board, the winners and losers, that we miss the bigger picture entirely. But what exactly are we missing?
Elias calls it the illusion of separation. This idea that we are somehow separate from the game itself, that these opposing forces aren't just part of a larger whole. He even uses a term from Eastern traditions, Maya, to describe it.
Maya. I've heard that word before, but honestly, I'm a little fuzzy on what it actually means. Can you break that down for us a bit?
Of course. So in many Eastern philosophies, Maya refers to the illusionary nature of reality as we perceive it. It's like a mirage in the desert. It seems real, tangible even, but it's just a trick of the light. When we talk about duality being an illusion, Maya is that force creating that illusion, that sense of separateness. We get so caught up in believing that these opposites are fundamentally different that we miss their interconnectedness.
So we're so busy focusing on the individual chess pieces, the individual moves, that we forget there's a whole board, a whole game unfolding. We're so worried about whether we're the black knight or the white bishop that we forget we chose to play the game in the first place.
Exactly. And Elias suggests that this very attachment to one side or the other, this need to label everything as good or bad, is what keeps us trapped in this cycle of duality.
Yep.
It's like we're limiting our moves on the chessboard because we've decided we can only move diagonally or horizontally, never both.
Wow, that's a powerful image. But if we're aiming to transcend this duality, like Elias says, does that mean we just stop playing altogether? I mean, we stop trying to make moves to win, to even participate. Conflict is a part of life, right?
You've hit on a really crucial point, and Elias actually addresses this directly.
Hmm.
He says, and I'm paraphrasing here, that trying to eliminate one side of duality is like trying to have a chessboard with only white squares. It misses the point. It's not about pretending conflict doesn't exist. It's about changing our relationship with it.
So it's less about changing the external game and more about changing our internal experience of the game. Is that what he means by transcending duality?
Exactly. It's about recognizing that the real battle isn't happening out there on the chessboard. It's happening within us. It's about shifting our internal landscape first and letting that transformation ripple outwards.
Okay, now that's really interesting. So how do we actually do that? How do we shift our perspective so drastically that we start to see the whole board, the interconnectedness, instead of getting lost in those individual squares?
Well, Elias offers some guidance on how to begin that inward journey, and that's what we'll explore next. Because, you see, he argues that this shift begins not with some grand gesture, but with something much more personal, something we all have the power to change.
So we're not talking about some big external revolution, but an internal one. It all starts with each of us.
That's it. Elias writes in the article, and all this is to happen within us, because it'll be this transformation in ourselves that will make everything around us change. It's a powerful idea that personal transformation can have a ripple effect outward.
So instead of trying to fix the whole chessboard out there in the world, we change how we see the board itself. But how do we even begin to do that? Because it's one thing to say change your perspective, but how do we actually go from seeing those individual squares to understanding the whole interconnected game?
Think of it this way. Every time we judge a situation or a person as inherently good or bad, we limit ourselves to just seeing half of the chessboard. We miss the bigger picture. What Elias suggests is a pretty radical shift in perspective where instead of trying to eliminate one side of the duality, we embrace the whole board with all its complexities.
Wait, so you're saying that if I can just change how I see a difficult situation, I can change my experience of it? That's kind of wild, but how is that even possible? We're practically hardwired to label things, to judge.
We are to a certain extent, but we also have an amazing capacity for growth and change. Elias believes that the key is shifting from a place of judgment and control to a place of acceptance and understanding. It's about recognizing that even the things we might label as negative or bad serve a purpose in the grand scheme of things.
That makes me think of another line from the article. To aspire to the light is to remain trapped in the duality of the world. It seems kind of counterintuitive at first, doesn't it? Shouldn't we be striving for the good, for the light?
It's a common misconception, and Elias tackles it head on. What he's suggesting is that it's actually our very pursuit of one side over the other that traps us in duality. It's like trying to play chess. By only moving toward one side of the board, eventually you just hit a wall.
Yeah.
He argues that real freedom comes from embracing the whole board, both the light and the dark, the wins and the losses.
So it's not about becoming passive or just accepting negativity, but about changing the energy behind our actions. It's about approaching challenges and even our own perceived flaws with more compassion and understanding.
Precisely. And this is where the concept of transcendence becomes really practical. It's not about escaping the world or pretending that conflict doesn't exist. It's about shifting our internal experience so that we can engage with the world from a place of wholeness instead of a place of division.
That makes sense. It's like I can still work towards positive change, but instead of being fueled by anger or judgment, I can approach it from this place of understanding and interconnectedness.
Exactly. You can still strive for justice, for example, fight for equality, but instead of getting stuck in that us versus them mentality, you approach it from a place of recognizing the inherent humanity in everyone, even in those you might disagree with.
Okay, that's huge. But how do we avoid slipping back into those old habits, those automatic reactions and judgments? How do we make this shift in perspective stick?
That's where Elias offers some really practical tools and practices that we can work into our daily lives. It's all about cultivating a new way of seeing, a new way of being in the world.
So we're talking about more than just like changing our minds, right? We're talking about actually changing our habits, those deep-seated patterns. How does Elias suggest we do that?
Well, he really emphasizes awareness.
Okay.
He says, only when we are aware of the game can we stop being puppets of it. It's about really paying attention to those moments when we find ourselves getting pulled back into that duality trap,
Yeah.
when we find ourselves judging, labeling, trying to make everything fit into these neat little boxes.
Right, but awareness alone doesn't necessarily change anything, does it? It's like I can be totally aware that I'm eating an entire bag of chips,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop.
Exactly. Awareness is just that first step.
Okay.
Elias talks about this need for conscious choice.
Mm-hmm.
He writes, every thought, every word, every action is a move on the chessboard. We have the power to choose moves that perpetuate the illusion of separation, or moves that lead us towards unity.
So it's about catching ourselves in those moments of duality and actually making a different choice, one that aligns with that bigger perspective, with that awareness of interconnectedness.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And he offers some really concrete practices that can help. Things like meditation, spending time in nature, practicing gratitude. These are all practices that can help us cultivate a sense of inner peace, of connection. And when we come from that place, we're able to approach difficult situations from a more grounded and centered place.
It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. If we're so busy being caught up in that drama, that duality, then we're approaching everything from this place of depletion.
Yeah.
But when we can cultivate that inner wholeness, then our actions start to come from a place of abundance.
That's beautifully put.
Aw, thanks.
And one thing that really stood out to me about Elias's writing is the emphasis he places on compassion. He argues that we can't really have true peace and unity without understanding and compassion, both for ourselves and for other people.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because if we can look at the world through that lens of compassion, if we can recognize that everyone's fighting their own battles, playing their own version of the game, it makes it a lot harder to hold on to those judgments and anger.
For sure.
And it becomes a lot easier to offer forgiveness and understanding to ourselves and to the people around us. Remember what Elias tells us. The duality of the world, cease to be an instrument that generates suffering to become an instrument of pacification. When we choose compassion, we are essentially choosing to transform duality from a source of conflict to a source of peace.
So we're not just talking about personal enlightenment here.
No.
We're talking about a much bigger shift in how we interact with the world around us, a shift that could create a ripple effect of peace and understanding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is so beautiful about Elias's message. It's deeply personal,
Yeah.
but also profoundly universal.
It's both.
It all comes back to that internal shift, that choice to step off the chessboard of duality and embrace the wholeness of reality.
It's like by recognizing the illusion, we free ourselves to experience life in a whole new way, a way that's characterized by peace, by unity, by interconnectedness.
It's a pretty radical idea if you think about it.
It's radical, but it's not impossible, right?
Right.
It starts with each of us choosing to see things a little differently,
Yes.
choosing compassion over judgment, understanding over division.
And remembering that we are not just pawns in some game.
Right.
We are players who have the power to create a more peaceful, a more harmonious reality.
That's an incredibly powerful thought to leave us with.
It is.
So to everyone listening, as you go about your day, your week, your life, remember that chessboard, okay?
Yeah.
Remember that you get to choose how you play this game.
You have that power.
And the most meaningful victories, the ones that really matter, they don't come from conquering your opponent.
No, they don't.
They come from transcending the game itself.
That's it.
And that, my friends, is a wrap on another deep dive.
It's been a pleasure,
We hope you enjoyed exploring these ideas with us.
as always.
Until next time, keep those beautiful minds open, those hearts curious, and never stop questioning.
Never